So what I thought we would design today is a fresh floral arrangement, and typically for the past several months when I incorporate fresh floral arrangements into the group, I always do them pre-recorded, but I thought I would create this one live with you guys today, showing you guys how to work the flowers into the foam and how to position them, because it is a little bit more challenging than silk florals. So that's what we're going to be doing today. The flowers we're going to be using, as well as the greenery, came from my garden. So for those of you that do have gardens and you're creating a design that's for sale, that you can send out locally, or if you're having a party or a get-together, this would be perfect for it because it only costs whatever the container costs, as well as a couple bricks of foam. So what I've done, we've used this container in the past for artificial, but I just like to use the same bases over and over again to give you guys different perspectives of how you can use them. So we've used them with orange flowers and bright lime green flowers, and today what we're going to be doing is using different shades of purple, green, and white. So this is going to be kind of more of an English garden style floral arrangement, because everything's not going to be strategically placed in the sense everything is perfect. So let me just make sure I'm able to see comments while we're live, so just give me 1 second. Okay, there we go. Hi Sandy, hi Carrie. So the flowers we're going to start off using are some of these beautiful Siberian irises. And these are a flower you can easily source at any grocery store, any supermarket. They're incredibly easy to find around this time of year. And they're typically relatively inexpensive at about $4 or $5 a bunch. Of course, if you have them growing on your yard, feel free to use those. The interesting thing about these is that this may look like one flower, but it does have another bud that's rather close to being open. This one will open more than likely tomorrow. So you do get a number of days out of these Siberian irises. So we're going to start off using a few bunches of them, and we are going to cut the stems a little bit short. We're not going to go full length today. And we're going to start placing these close to the middle. And we have several of these flowers that we can use today. Hi, Mary. Hi, Maura. Yep, so I did create a notification about 10 minutes before, and I marked it as an announcement. And if you guys did receive that as a notification, please let me know. I always like to know if you guys are able to see those alerts. We are still trying to work out ManyChat. It has been giving me difficulties. So let me just reposition the phone real quick. So as you can see, we are staggering the heights as we do in artificial floral arrangements. And the nice thing about the Siberian iris is that it also has greenery. Typically, the stalks of flowers grow separately than the greenery, and if you do have them growing tight together, I just recommend cutting them off. These are a little bit finicky because if you cut them too high up, all the leaves will kind of fall apart. So make sure you cut them low enough where they're all still bunched together and they don't come apart like this. So what you can do is just use some of this greenery to support some of the flowers. For those of you that were in the group and may recall, we created an arrangement using 3 large white allium, and we also came back in with some dogwood branches and had them shooting up. It's really nice to have different textures like that and different heights. And this will make it a little bit more realistic as it grows in the wild. So we're just staggering them. Hi, Bob. So you can make this a one-sided design. You can make it from multiple different points of view. Today, I think we're going to do it from 3 points of view. So this is going to be pretty from all 3 angles. And then in the back, what I always recommend you do is make sure that the foam is hidden. If the foam's hidden and you can't see any of the mechanics, you're all good to go. But make sure that it is hidden, whether you use greenery or moss. You name it, whatever you want to use. Just make sure it is covered. You can come back in with a little bit more grass. And this will help with the negative spaces around the flowers, so you always want to have something that kind of anchors them in. Makes it a little bit more realistic, but it also makes sure that the flowers don't get washed out in everything that's behind you. Okay, so we've added all of the flowers. Again, we can come back in with some bits and pieces of greenery. We could place a couple around the sides. And by having some of the flowers just kind of poke out like you see here and not have them completely visible, just goes for that English garden effect a little bit more, making them slightly hidden like that. Again, we do want to have them staggered, so if you have one flower that's a little bit higher, just kind of offset them so that you kind of have a step-like motion. And the next flower we're going to come back in with is some Ayuga, and this one has kind of reached its full max of life, but we also picked this out of my yard, and it really looks nice against the Siberian iris. So what we're going to do is we're going to poke some of these in, but we are going to cut them a little bit short. We're going to kind of use this as a covering for our foam. So we're not going to have them any further up than the iris. And again, whatever you have in your yard is perfectly fine to use. Just make sure that it doesn't cause any rashes or anything like that. And it also isn't overly bug prone, because if you do have flowers that are overly bug prone, you'll end up with issues if you go to resell them. Yep, Karen, so all of these flowers are fresh. And up top, we just have a couple more irises, but I will show you guys the full effect after we're finished. But we also can take a couple of these and poke them behind the iris to kind of draw them up a little bit. I would not be placing these with their full height in front of the iris, or else it would just obstruct for them. Hi, Jennifer. So these did come from my yard, and I know not everybody has a yard full of flowers. Some of you guys may live in apartments, and if that's the case, you could always just go to your local grocery store. The Ayuga, as well as the hosta leaves we may use in a little while, may not be available. Those aren't flowers that typically are found wholesale or even retail. But the Siberian iris, which are these beautiful purple flowers, are definitely easily accessible. And you could just substitute for whatever flowers are local to you. So like I said, we're kind of using this as a filler to mask the foam. So what we have is our thriller, which is the Siberian iris, and then our filler is going to be this Ayuga, and then we're going to come back in with little bits and pieces of greenery. And as we approach the front, we're going to cut them even shorter. This one is even too long. We do want to have them relatively short in the front. Yep, more so they do bloom differently depending on where you live. Here in Massachusetts, all of these flowers are blooming currently. But if you're not able to source them, like I said, you could always just go to any grocery store or purchase from a wholesaler. Everything that I'm using can easily be found in your yards. But even if you can't, they're all relatively inexpensive. The Siberian irises aren't crazy expensive, and you can find them at Trader Joe's or Shaw's. They always carry them this time of year. So we've added most of the Ayuga, and our next step is to begin filling in a little bit more. And we have a different type of greenery we can use for that. We have some hosta leaves that we can kind of accent behind. So as you can see here, if you could pull it up on camera, we have some hosta leaves that are variegated, and I'm just tucking those in behind some of the Siberian iris. So these are just very softly variegated. And I love working with this greenery because hostas are plentiful here in Massachusetts. Every single garden seems to have them. And they do really hold up nicely. The leaves do last a pretty long time. So we've just added 4 leaves, and each plant in my yard probably has 300 or 400 leaves. So just taking 4 or 5 leaves every now and then for projects like this truly don't hurt the plants. So the next flower I thought we would, or foliage we'd incorporate is this burning bush. This burning bush has little flowers that come off in the spring like this. And as the weeks progress, they do fall off. But right now, they do hold their shape and they don't fall off. So we're going to use some of this to kind of mask our foam even more. And we'll just come back in between the Ayuga. But like I said in the beginning of this video, this is going to be basically three-sided. We're not going to be able to view this from the back. It'd most likely be pushed up against a wall or a buffet table. But you still want to go completely around and completely cover all of your mechanics. You don't want any of the foam showing. And if this is too tedious for you, you could always just use some moss, some Spanish moss, some Christmas moss. That's a perfect cover. You have pond irises blooming. Exactly, you could be using those. Those are typically yellow, I believe. And I think they're called yellow flag irises as well. And those are perfect for this. Just mix it with some yellow flowers, or even purple would be very pretty. So I'm keeping this greenery nice and close to the base. We're not going to be using it to take away from any of the yuga or the irises. But what do you think, guys? Very simple, very cost effective. Like I said, all we paid for was the container that we've used multiple times. Just a basic white container. This came from Hobby Lobby in their spring collection. And I will put it in a material list so you guys know what type of flowers we're using as well as the foliage. But so far what we've used is Siberian iris, about 6 or 7 flowers, a few leaves of this basic variegated hosta, and I believe wholesalers carry this as well. Retail locations most likely don't, but wholesalers will. So if you have any floral exchanges close by, they definitely carry some hosta leaves. So we got the Siberian iris, the hosta leaves, the Siberian iris foliage, some ayuga, and then just some very basic burning bush. And a fact about burning bush is that it's actually illegal in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and I believe Rhode Island. It is an invasive species, so you cannot be propagating it, but in this case it's perfectly fine because these plants are wild in our climate. So if you live in these 3 states, you're easily able to find them in your yard. So this is definitely a project I'd recommend just to create for your own home. And if you go selling your arrangements like this, your fresh flower arrangements, just be using a different foliage. You can be using basically anything. Leatherleaf fern is a big hit, and that's very similar to the basic ferns we use within the group, the artificial versions. So what we can do now is just simply turn our arrangement around and continue hiding any of the foam that's showing. We could use some hosta leaves for that, or we could be using different foliages. It's totally up to you. So we placed a couple hostas going upright to kind of add some drama and some white throughout the entire design. And now we're just using it as a ground cover, basically, to mask as much foam as possible before we come back in with some more burning bush. How often would you water this? So irises are typically found in, more wet climates. So I'd be watering this depending on how much heat you have or where you place it. I'd be doing it every other day or so. I check it every day just to make sure that it is well watered. Because once they do dry out, unfortunately, it's very hard for them to rehydrate, and you'll most likely lose most of the flowers. So I did pre-soak this foam, and I also lined it with some plastic. I just used some very thick plastic. That way it doesn't damage my container. And if we were to sell this arrangement, we would just make sure that we'd have plastic so we don't damage our customer's table. Thank you. All right, so like I said, we're going to completely cover the back. Again, you could be using some moss. So here's some Spanish moss, and I've used this multiple times, and I've included the item number in a number of different material lists. But this came from Nude Nielsen, and what it is just a preserved moss in its natural form. And all we have to do is just simply take a small amount and pepper it in at random. We're not using so much that we'd have to anchor it in using a little floral pin. We're just using very minuscule amounts. But this is pretty much it, you guys. I hope you enjoyed this. So get out in your gardens or your friends' gardens or family gardens and cut some flowers. Again, we have only invested in the pot as well as a couple bricks of floral foam. Actually, 1.5 bricks of floral foam to be exact, because we did line it with plastic down below. So $1.50 for the foam, and then depending on where you source your container, maybe a couple dollars for that. In total, I'd say about $3 or $4 to create a very stately arrangement. So now I'm going to take it off the stand just to quickly show you guys. Of course, the table is a mess, but something like this is very simple to create, and it does have that natural effect. But I hope you guys enjoyed this, and of course, if you'd like more lives, I'd be more than willing to do them within the group rather than pre-recorded. I always love to hear your feedback. So until next time, I hope you guys have a great evening, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye, everyone.